Hey folks,
Hey allihopa!
welcome to another video.
Today we are rounding up the month of May
Yes.
and what we read.
And what we bought.
The first book I finished this month was The Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the third book in the From Blood and Ash series. I don't know if the series has another name, but that's what I'm calling it. I gave this a 2.5 out of 5, and if you know, the previous two books I gave like 4 stars. This was just very fillery and a lot of exposition. I mean, the other books have exposition too, but there are like other things that kind of like weigh it up a little bit. Whereas this one was just like a lot of more world building exposition, which was like, okay, but like you're kind of complicating everything. But the ending was pretty good, so I'm looking forward to the next one, obviously, which I will read because I have no self-control.
The first book that I read is Magnolia by Nina Minya Pauls. I had seen this when it came out last year and I wanted to get it, so I did manage to finally get it, and it was really good. I gave it 4 stars. It talks about being Asian in a country where Asian is a minority, and then traveling to China and trying to discover your identity, and also talking about popular culture and how Asians are represented in media. I think people should read it.
The next book I finished this month was A Promised Land by Barack Obama, who you might know from being the president. It was okay. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. It kind of started off really strong, and he kind of like brushed over like his time before becoming the president, and that was all really interesting. But then once he becomes the president, also this is like the first in like several books, I assume, because it only covers like the first year or two. And then it kind of becomes talking about like one issue, like one chapter is like one issue, climate change or the oil spill or some other thing that happened during his time as president. And it's kind of like, okay, like I get it, you have to structure your time as president somehow, but it was a bit boring. Say maybe the second half of the book was not as strong as the first half, but it was still nice to have read it and like hear his thoughts on being the president, because it was very interesting. It's not like the perfect job and you will never do everyone right by your choices and stuff, and I think like him kind of like talking about gives a bit more insight of being a world leader.
The next book I read was L'île aux 30 cercueils by Maurice Leblanc. This is another one of the Arsène Lupin books. It translates to The Island of 30 Coffins. I think it's one of the ones that has, from a scientific point of view rather than like a racism point of view, aged poorly, because it's like an island where there's all these fantastical happenings, and then, spoiler alert, the like miracle is that they have some kind of radioactive rock, and that's like what is keeping people alive for longer and growing the plants. And we now know 100 years later that radioactivity does not do that and is in fact bad for you.
Who would have known?
So like the impact of the ending was a little spoiled, because reading in the 21st century, I'm like, yeah, holding on to like pure grade uranium is not good for you. Yeah, and the story itself was kind of amusing. There's like lots of murders happening and typical caper, kind of lots of stuff happening and you don't understand any of it, but yeah, the impact of the ending was a little lessened for me.
The next book I finished was The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and this is just the backside of the actual cover because I just wanted to swap it over. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The book is kind of like 2 parts in a way, because like the first bit is like the main character Rin, and she is poor and she doesn't want to like get married and do all that stuff. She is like determined to get into the highest like military school, but it's like super difficult. Like only like the rich get in basically, but she studies hard and then she gets in, and then you follow her in school. And then war breaks out, and this is kind of like based in ancient China, but like obviously fantasy and like magic and stuff. the brutality of war is really covered in this book. It's based on like some real events as well that happened. I thought it was really good. There were some things that might have changed personally, but overall I really enjoyed it. I thought the world was really interesting and like how magic worked. But then there was like some things I thought Rin as a character was a little bit like flip-floppy sometimes. I was like, I couldn't always predict like how she was gonna behave in a certain moment, which I was very jarring to me. Overall, the story and like the world weighed that over the flip-floppiness of the main character. I would recommend. I will read the second book once I finish the book I'm currently reading. So yes, I will continue the series.
So the next book I finished was Dirty River, a queer femme of color dreaming her way home by Leah Lakshmi Piepzna Samarasina. I gave this 3 stars. I kind of enjoyed it. It's about Leah, who is South Asian and white mix, and she runs away from home, basically from the US. She moves to Canada, and it's kind of her time in Canada, like very poor, and being a queer person of color, and kind of how she navigates all of that, and like navigating immigration. I was really interested in reading this for the subject matter, but I found it really difficult to read. There was a lot of like shock value that I didn't think was really supported by the narrative. Like there would be some really explicit things that sometimes would just appear out of nowhere, and it didn't, to me, it didn't make sense narratively to say them in such an explicit, aggressive way. So I kind of felt like the author was trying to make me not read it. Like, if you can't handle this, then you shouldn't be reading this kind of thing. And I don't appreciate that particularly when I read a book. So I found that difficult. It had a lot of really interesting queer theory and like talking about being a person of color who's disabled and who's also queer, and all of that kind of brought together into one narrative, and I thought that was really cool. A little bit of good and bad.
The next book I read was Darius the Great Deserves Better by Adib Khorram, and I read this last month, the first one. So this follows basically like a year, 6 months after the first book, and it's set basically all in the US, and it's about like how Darius is a teenager and like discovers his like sexuality. He's together with a guy that kind of discovers like how he feels about like being himself and like discovering like other people and that kind of stuff, and talks about like other kind of queer identities as well, which was really nice. So my favorite relationship in this book series is like Darius and his dad was not present a lot in the book, which I was like, oh, but it was still really good. You kind of developed the relationship with Darius and his like American grandparents, because they come to stay with them, and it was really nice to just read and him kind of exploring himself and coming to understand who he is. I would recommend this series. It's very easy to read as well, which is always a big plus.
The next book I read was When Fox is 1,000 by Larissa Lai. This is a very dreamlike fiction book that kind of links the narrative of Fox, who is a magical entity from Chinese folklore, and then a nun in the 10th century in China, and then finally a Chinese Canadian who's living in the 80s and 90s. It was quite difficult to read because a lot of the subject matter was quite heavy, but because it was so lyrical and dreamlike, it sped by. I read it in 2 days. It was all there, and then I kind of got to the end and I was like, oh, wow. I really, really enjoyed it, but it was quite hard, just like emotionally. And I liked how it was able to link the 3 strands, like these 3 kind of women. I mean, Fox isn't really a woman. Their threads and how their lives are kind of intermingled somehow. It was pretty good. I give it 4 stars.
The next book I read was a manga called Jujutsu Kaisen. I watched the anime and I really liked this, so I decided that I was going to read the manga, and it's like quite a few volumes already out. So this is the first volume, which is like basically the first 2 episodes of the anime. But it follows a character called Itadori, and he is kind of like a himbo. I really like this character, and he kind of stumbles upon this magical world that he doesn't know anything about. He swallows a finger that is like a demon king's finger, and then he kind of like is possessed by this demon king. But because he's like mentally strong or something, he can like, hey dude, like you cannot take over my body, it's my body. And so they have like this kind of strained relationship. But then Itadori also becomes like part of this jujutsu high school where they train teenagers to become like, not wizards, but like, yeah. Basically, so they can like power this like a monster strength and magical force to fight demons and other beings. It's really good. It's a bit violent. At least the manga is like black and white, obviously, but like the anime is a bit violent. But I really enjoyed it, and it's really fun. All the characters are very like flavorful. Like they really are characters. I will continue reading it.
The next book I read is Gender Fluid by Sally Hines. This is for cis people, but I thought it would be kind of interesting to read, and it kind of introduces what gender and sex are and how we think of them in society and things. I will say I found it difficult to read because the typeface changes, not the font, but the size. And I know that it's designed so that if you only have like 20 minutes, you only read the really big type, and then you get the gist of it, and then if you want more, you can read the smaller type. But if I'm just reading it as a book rather than flicking through it, it was very hard. I struggled to read when it's all the same, so changing it up. Every time I started a new paragraph that was a different size, it took me a little bit to like actually engage with it. And it also kind of glosses over quite a lot of stuff that I would have thought was important when talking about like trans issues, because it does talk about trans people, but I don't know, it just didn't feel like it was really covering everything that I would have thought should be covered. If you are cis and don't know anything about what like gender or being trans means, then this might be a good book for you, just for a very baseline kind of approach. And it has like glossary terms and things and lots of pictures, so it kind of illustrates a lot. It's very visual, and it will help you in that way, I think.
The next book I read is Mr. Impossible by Maggie Seawater. This is the second book of the Dreamer trilogy, and the first one is called On the Hawk. I don't really want to say what this is about because I might spoil it, but basically the Dreamer trilogy in general follows Ronan Lynch and his two brothers, Matthew and Declan, and kind of like what happens after the Raymond cycle. Yeah, and that's kind of it. Like, obviously the Dreamer trilogy implies a lot of dreaming and other dreamers. I really like Maggie Seawater's writing, at least in the Raymond cycle and this one. Dreamy and kind of trickles along. I don't know. I really enjoy it, and I really like the narrator for the audiobooks. So I kind of listened and like read it at the same time. And he has a very lovely voice. It's not for everyone, but it really suits the books, I think. Very nice to listen to. Would recommend. If you like the Raven cycle, you will probably read these books too.
The next book that I read is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. This was a book that a lot of people were talking about. It came out in 2021, I think in January, and lots of people were like, it's amazing, you have to read it. It's like lesbians in the 50s. I didn't really like it. I was very like interested in the idea, because it's a Chinese American who is a lesbian, and she's discovering her sexuality and things, and the premise is great. And she like goes to this lesbian club with her friend who is also a lesbian. That is the premise of the book, but all of it felt like exposition. And then it got to the last chapter, and then it was like, okay, goodbye, and we'll skip 1 year, and that's the epilogue. And I was like, wait, but Like nothing's happened. Very little has happened. There was a lot of run-up and a lot of things that happened in the beginning of the book, or details that were mentioned, just don't really end up mattering later. So there's in the 50s, there's the Red Scare that's happening, so a lot of suspicion on Chinese Americans, and that's mentioned a lot, but it doesn't really impact the story. There also the Lavender Scare was happening, so like also lesbians, and that does happen, but it just kind of felt like the book hadn't come together, and then it was the end. And I also didn't like how the end happened. I didn't like the ending of the book, the story.
Yeah.
So it wasn't for me, I think. If you want to read it, there's information at the end about actual things that were happening at that time, and I think that is useful and helpful, but I actually already knew a bunch of it. So for me, it just wasn't what I needed.
The next book I listened to was The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. So this is about Paige, who, this takes place in like London, but like in the future. She is she can walk in other people's dreams or something, kind of. And then she's kind of working underground because being like a medium or having these powers is like not allowed. It's very like, you can't talk about it. It's like illegal for you to be alive. And then she accidentally kills someone else. And then she's kind of taken away from London to Oxford. And it's part of this thing called the Bone Season, basically. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. It was okay. I kind of kept like not keeping track of what was happening, and I think it was due to the narrator. I didn't think that the narration was amazing, which is quite important for an audiobook. I kept like zooming in and out of the book a lot. Overall, I think the world is interesting, but I think I need to kind of like maybe read it physically to like really comprehend the story a bit better. Or maybe it wasn't a very good story.
The last book I read this month was Les Dents du Tigre by Maurice Leblanc, another Arsène Lupin book. And this book actually came out first in English. It was written in French, translated into English, and it came out in 1914. But then the book in French only came out in 1921. I don't know why. It's also strange because the French version includes World War I. So I don't know, there must have been a lot of changes between the English version and the French version. But anyway, it's another caper. It's moderately enjoyable. Watch out for period typical ableism is pretty much all I can really say. It's kind of like, really? And then there's like, he kind of includes political commentary sometimes, and I'm like, you should really not, because you have no idea and you're gonna age poorly. But the story itself is fine. It's just like, there's one chapter where it's revealed that Arsène Lupin became the king of like North Africa. And it's just like, this could have not been included in this book and the book would have been better for it. And he explains how he does it, and it's all kind of vaguely racist and just weird and sexist. And it just like, just don't. Like, if you take that chapter of the book out, the book is much better. He was an old white man writing in France, so that really tells you about him. But yeah, I mean, if you can ignore those bits, it's fine.
The next one I read was Empress of a Thousand Skies by Rhoda Belleza. And this is about Rhiannon, and she is about to become the Empress of some planets. Of the skies, yeah. On the day of her like coronation or whatever, she is almost murdered. There's an attempt on her life, because all her family's dead, by the way. So there's an attempt on her life, and she flees the place. And then this other guy is like accused of her this attempt, and he has nothing to do with it. He was not even close by, which is very strange. Yeah, and then you follow Rhee and the guy who's the accused of her murder, like, but he's obviously innocent. What was strange about this book, first and foremost, and this is a spoiler, by the way, is that the two POV characters never meet in the story, like, at all. They don't meet at all, and that was super weird to me. And then, other than that, this book was not very good in my opinion. The characters were very flat and very cardboard cutouts, kind of. I didn't feel like I got to know the characters. There would be like some sort of like, oh, my past is so sad, blah, blah, blah. But it was like, I don't really care about this because, like, I don't know you as a character. And I know that this is supposed to, like, make me get to know you better, but it's just like, everything just fell flat for me in this book. And I've had this book for so long because I thought I was really going to enjoy this, but it was just, and this is the first in like a duology as well, but I will not continue reading it. I'm sorry. I really wanted to enjoy this because I thought like, oh, it would be like a fast read, like sci-fi romance kind of thing, but it was not at all about that. I know that the author probably intended it to be like a lot of like colonialism and stuff, which, you know, I appreciated the attempt, but it was just very kind of flat in the way that it was made. Anyway, and the last book I read, which I read in like 2 days, was You and Me on Vacation by Emily Henry. This is also called People We Meet on Vacation in the US, I think. And this is about Poppy and Alex, kind of their friendship to romance over like the span of 12 years. And you kind of follow, so some of the chapters are like this summer or like taking place in the now, and then every other chapter, so it's like the first summer and then like up until today. Yeah, and it was really, really good, and it was so sweet, and like their friendship and like them as characters was just like very fleshed out, and I knew who they were as people, and yeah, it was just very sweet and nice, and it was lovely to read. Wonderful romance. And she wrote Beach Read last year, I think, which was really good, and I read that and we liked it as well. So I will probably read all of her romance books, because if they are this good, then oh boy, we got some good reading ahead of us. 5 out of 5 stars.
Well, that's it. That's everything that we read.
Yes.
I think we both have quite a big haul.
So I hauled this guy, obviously, because he's new. Oh, and this guy. They're both, I've read them as well, so that's how it be sometimes. I got this guy, which is the 4th volume of the Heartstopper series. This is also doodled. Yeah, so this obviously follows Nick and Charlie and their little romance.
I hauled Homebody by Rupi Kaur. I've actually read the other two and I quite enjoyed them. I thought the first one was better, but the second one was also pretty good. So I thought I might as well get the third one and see. This is poetry. I think it's pretty Tumblr famous because it's very short poems that are kind of easily digestible, have that kind of Tumblr poetry aesthetic, and there's also a lot of doodles as well. It's kind of about a person of color and their life in a white country, or at least the previous ones have talked about that, and also being a woman.
Another book I got this month was The Ones We Were Meant to Find by Johan He, and this is kind of like set in like a climate apocalypse kind of way, and it's about 2 sisters. They're either sister or friends. I don't really remember. Apocalyptic, but I don't think it's gonna be like overwhelmingly depressing, hopefully. I mainly got it for the cover because it looks amazing, but I'm sure it will be a very nice read as well.
I got Black Girl Call Home by Jasmine Mans. This was kind of an impulse buy. I think I had seen it online. This is also poetry. I had seen it online, but I haven't really particularly thought about it. And then while I was in the store buying Rupi Kaur, I also got this. It looks interesting. It's good to read. Female poets of color, especially Black poets. I'm sure it'll be excellent.
The next one I got was May the Best Man Win by C.R. Elor, and this follows a trans teen who goes up against his ex-boyfriend in becoming the homecoming king. And then obviously some little romance maybe between the two again. I follow this author on Twitter, so obviously I've seen a lot about this and I'm very excited. As soon as I heard about this, I was like, this sounds adorable. I need to read it ASAP. So I hope it will be good.
The next book I got is Heavenly Bodies, Cult Treasures and Spectacular Saints from the Catacombs. This book came out, I think, 8 years ago, and I have wanted it since it came out. I had it bookmarked on my computer since I saw it. It's about relics and saints. I'm not going to show you. It has a lot of pictures, but it's all very graphic in that it's dead bodies. People don't want to see that. I personally am very interested in that. I'm academically interested in the cult of saints and in medieval art, so this kind of fits neatly in that niche of things that I really like. So I'm very excited. The pictures look amazing, and it's got like explanations about the saints and stuff.
The next book I got was The Raven is Dark by A.M. Strickland. This is a Illumicrate edition, so it has like some nice little like art.
Ooh.
So yeah, basically there are like blood mages, and I think the main character turns out to be one as well, and her dad was like killed for being one. And then I think she wants to try and figure out what happened, and she's brought to the royal palace against her will. Yeah, and this is also like polyamorous, I think.
Ooh.
Yeah, which is not very common in books in general. Yeah, I started reading this with the intention of following the Illumicrate read along, but this book didn't really speak to me. Well, I didn't get very far, but it took me a while to get into it, so I might give it a read like later in the year or something. The blurb sounds interesting, so I might just try and power through it anyway. And the cover is obviously gorgeous as well. So
my next books all came together. They're from the Poetry Book Society's subscription, so I got 6 books again. First one is Brilliant Corners by Nuzhat Bukhari. I don't know anything about any of these. I have never heard of any of the authors, so I have nothing particularly to say about them, but I can just go through them. A Blood Condition by Kayo Chingonyi, Stone Fruit by Rebecca Perry, Notes on the Sonnets by Luke Kennard, My Father by Eduardo Moga, and The Voice of Sheila Chandra by Kazim Ali. I really enjoyed the books that I have read from the previous book box, so I'm hoping that these will also be good, you know?
well, hopefully a poetry society
They would
knows how
know.
to
Yeah.
choose
Yeah.
books.
They were founded by T.S. Eliot. So yes, you would hope that they know what they're talking about. And so far, of the ones that I've read, they have.
The next book I got was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I read 2 of her previous books. One is called The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and the other one is Daisy Jones and the 6. I liked Evelyn Hugo, did not enjoy Daisy Jones that much. This I have like medium expectations about, but this I think is about like a kind of like famous family of siblings, I think, and then like something happens during this party or something, and I'm all about that shit. I want to know what happens. The blurb kind of reminds me of the movie The Party or Festen, which is a Danish movie, which I really enjoy. But I don't think it's going to be as like juicy as that movie is, because that's super juicy. But it kind of felt like similar vibes where it's like secrets will probably be revealed.
The next book I got is A Queer Reader, 2,500 Years of Male Homosexuality. This is a collection of basically quotations or excerpts from pieces that people have written that deal with or refer to gay men or male homosexuality in general. I had a quick flick through it. There's a few readers like this where some of them are very comical and then some of them are very serious, and they're all kind of mixed in together because they're in chronological order. So I think it will make for kind of interesting reading, but I also think that it's not designed to be read cover to cover. So we'll see. I don't know how I'll decide to read it. I just like to read about queer shit, so
Fair enough.
Yeah, and then, you know, if I ever want to see what so-and-so said about that, then I can open up this book.
My next couple of hauls is actually from bookshops. So I went into Forbidden Planet and I got these two. So this is Jonathan Strange and Miss Norrell by Susanna Clarke. And I liked, obviously, Piranesi. And I have wanted to read this before, but like...
It's so big.
It's very big, but I will try and read this. Also, R.F. Kuang, who wrote The Poppy War, has a book coming out next year, which is like a response to this one and A Secret History, or like some sort of... the blurb mentioned them or whatever, and I was like, that would be interesting to have read this. Also, I want to just read this because Piranesi was good.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that this will be good as well. I got this one because it was on sale. I had the first one. I have not read the first one, but I was like, why not? It's on sale, $12.99 for hardcover. It's pretty cheap, especially seeing as it was $18.99, and it's signed or whatever. So I mean, again, I haven't read the first one, so I should probably get on that. I don't even really know what the first one is about, like fantasy.
But I have dragons.
Yes, exactly. So. Yeah, and I think someone said that the first one, if you like the Day of a Bard trilogy, then you would probably maybe enjoy this one. And I was like, oh, well then.
The final book I got, which was a gift from this person for my birthday, is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, The Ultimate Visual History. This is kind of the art book of the film. This is a film that I grew up with and really, really like. I really like the whole thought that went into the film. Is really cool and interesting, so now I can learn more about it. And we watched the film recently, and you hadn't seen it before.
No, I had not.
I would recommend it if you kind of like sci-fi, Encounters of the Third Kind. It's about aliens. Just the world building and the alien arrival is so well thought out and really interesting. I'm excited to dive in.
The next one I got was at Foyles in Stratford. This one is like a horror book. Mark Stanilevsky's House of Leaves. And basically, this is a horror book and it's fairly strangely written. And it basically follows like several people documenting something in a house or something, and all of their kind of descent into madness, basically. And there's like apparently somewhere in the book like things that you have to like read in the mirror and stuff in order to be able to read it. And also I'm trying to figure out how to read this. Like, do I just read it from cover to cover, or is there like a way to read it? But we shall see. And then I got Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzalez, and she wrote a book I read last year, I think, called Only Mostly Devastated. And this is more about a bi person. The main character here, gives advice at her school, romantic advice, and then she is in love with her best friend, but then she ends up falling for someone else, maybe. Anyway, there's a lot of Twitter drama going around about this book or whatever, and I was like, well, I gotta support her because it's about a bi person, so... Anyway, and also it sounds pretty cute, so... I love how different these two books are. Yeah. They're like complete opposites. And then at Gaze the Word, I got these two. This book is called Playing the Palace by Paul Rudnick. This sounds exactly like Red, White, and Royal Blue, which I don't have a problem with at all. It's one of my favorite books of all time, and I saw this like as soon as we walked in, and I was like, well then, I gotta buy it.
You gotta.
Like the cover, like everything. It's obviously slightly different. Instead of like the president's son, it's like just some guy from New York, basically. And I'm sure it will be like a fun little read. And then I got Your Silence Will Not Protect You by Audre Lorde. And this is like a collection of writings and poetry. And I thought the cover is really cute.
Yes, I've read it and it's very good. So definitely can recommend already.
I was thinking about maybe reading like one essay a night or something, because they're not very long. And that's everything.
That is everything. Let us know what you thought about what we read. It was kind of quite eclectic, I think.
Yes. All over the place.
Yes. And also let us know what you think about the books that we hauled, because that's also quite an eclectic mix. A lot of different things happening.
Do follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Goodreads, where we are Tess and Orlin. Give us a like, a comment, and subscribe to us. And have a nice, lovely June. And we shall see you at the end of the month. Hey do!
Bye!